Dear sir, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to present you Wolf LAPINS with his next presentation. You see both halves of the idea for the strategy conference. Wolf and me invented the whole thing, sitting in Carinthia at a table at the lake, at the Wörthersee, and we're discussing what we can do, how we can torture our future participants, and we found the idea of the strategy conference, which worked out well and reached a level that we have such interesting guests from Armenia as we have today, and they give us the honor to listen for your presentation too. Wolf, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Dankeschön. Also das ist ja ganz alt.
Thank you. This is actually an old picture. So there was 24 years and not 23 years of experience abroad. Dear colleagues, I would like to take you to a country in your immediate neighborship. And I would like to address a problem that sounds as if the door is opened on Church Day, but seen from the internal prisma, the echo chamber isn't that big after all, namely the country Albania, where I had the pleasure to work for more than 2 years. I have selected the subject of a myth or political will. Now, in the first part of my presentation, I would like to give you an overview of the political situation in Albania, and I hope that my former colleague Aida is not going to go for my throat or my jugular, because we were in Albania for 2 years together. And I'm going to talk about the background and the context of the greater Albanian region. Now, at first, I would like to share with you a few principles, just a rough overview of Albania. The national stereotyping is responsible whether a country has a positive or a negative image. George Byron, at the beginning of the 19th century, as you may know, published a bestseller in Great Britain, and he created a romantic image of Albania. Karl May's adventure novel, Durch das Land der Skipetaren, through the country of the Skipetars, this created a cliché and a narrative of Albania, of a wild landscape and well, almost criminal, shady characters. And the grandchildren of those criminals now are flooding the EU with drugs. Albanian drug crime does constitute a challenge for the internal security in Western Europe and in Albania. But this bashing affects the entire country. And since 2014, it remains as a candidate country in the status, and it hopes that it will be invited in 2019 for by Brussels to accede to the EU. EU membership for Albanians is quite clear to them because of the fact that the history is closely related to the European one, and the Albanian is also an Indo-Germanic language. There's a lot of Albanians who are in favor of the EU. That's comparable only with the Albanian part of Kosovo. But this should be interpreted correctly. The citizens know that the accession will mean a lot more than just 10 or 15 years of participation. So we're focused on the future. There's a commitment and a strong wish that there should be more Europe than now. And we hope that, and we know it, we know the slogan, and if the German mark doesn't come to us, we will go to the German mark. That's what the East Germans said 30 years ago. Now, if you relate this to Albania, well, since Europe doesn't come to us, we will go to Europe. According to a study of my former institution from December of 2018, 33% of Albanians intend to go to Germany and to emigrate there for good, followed by the US, Italy, and Greece as destinations. The likeliness of actually leaving the country is assumed at 7%, realistically speaking. With a population of 2.9 million inhabitants, we see that there will be a very strong brain drain if more people intend to emigrate. Now, what's the situation like today? We are caught between standstill and progress. The ambition to engage in reforms, and the EU and the OECD are praising the implementation of the judiciary reform. This vetting process, 802 judges and public prosecutors will be checked for their personal integrity and their technical skills. After 1 year of vetting, in March of 2019, 56 people have been successfully vetted. More than 40 were rejected. They either could not or did not want to disclose assets. In light of this low level of vetting, it seems unrealistic that the vetting can be completed by 2023. The democratic development in Albania and in the Western Balkans is stagnant, and sometimes it is even going down. Civil society blames the political elites and the EU because Brussels' main category is stability. In view of the geopolitical situation of Albanian interests and interests of Russia, Turkey, and China, the EU, in its real political drive, sees those deficits and authoritarian behavior as well, okay, because as long as the elites provide stability, this stabilocracy, well, stability comes before democracy, and that's a fact. Because the Democracy Index of Freedom House, Albania is ranked 68 of 100 countries. So, party-free, effective democracy, as the Bertelsmann Foundation said in its Transformation Index, and freedom of information, and Journalists Without Borders gives rank 75 out of 180 countries. Now, this brings me to the second part of my presentation, the actual question of myth versus reality of a greater Albania. And for that purpose, unfortunately, I have to confront you with history. Let me start with the League of Prizren so that we know what we're talking about. You may remember, not personally, but from your history lessons, the San Stefano peace in 1878, the end of the Russian-Turkish War was laid down. Any border transformations were to lead to expansion of Bulgaria that was given the status of autonomy, and not only Macedonia but also southern Albanian territories were to be covered by Bulgaria. Leading Albanian intellectuals protested against this peace treaty and the loss of Albanian settlements. Upon their initiative, the most influential Albanian Southern Slavonic Muslim leaders congregated in Prizren, in the south of Kosovo. And this league, this is the League of Prizren, and this alliance is the rebirth of the Albanian nation, or the beginning of the Albanian nationalist movement. The political demands within the Ottoman Empire that also provided for the re-establishment, their privileged position in terms of taxes and weapons, and the emancipation from the Christian population and the territorial claims of other countries were to be counteracted. In the League, there were differences between the southern Albanian and the northern Albanian or Muslim and Kosovo participants. Ethno-nationalistic desires were not put forward because the League was a regional collection of Muslims. The two Balkan Wars between 1912 and 1913 then led to a reorganization on the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire had to give territory to the neighboring countries and was crowded back to the current borders of Turkey. Kosovo was conquered by Serb troops and was reintegrated, and attempts were made that the northern Albanian territory was also included in the state, but this failed due to the resistance of the Hungarian Empire. They were in favor of an independent Albanian state with the objective of having a bulwark against Serbia. Thus, the Austro-Hungarian Empire could prevent Serbia from having access to the Adriatic. With the support of the forming of the Albanian state, Italy also created the right impetus for creating a national Albanian identity. In 1912, the independence of Albania was proclaimed, independence of the determination of the borders. During the Conference of Ambassadors in London between the 12th of December until the 13th of August, the newly formed Albanian state was removed from the Ottoman Empire and new borders were laid down. Austria-Hungary favored an Albanian state, including Kosovo. Serbia, however, with its historical argumentation and with the diplomatic backing of Russia, prevailed. So Kosovo became part of the Kingdom of Serbia, and Albanian settlements were split up. So the border between Albania and Kosovo is the result of the diplomacy of major European powers back then. So I will now move on to the Second World War and the Kingdom of Greater Albania. In 1925, the Albanian President Ahmed Sugu tried to reduce the influence of Serbia due to secret military agreements with Italy. Rome now took over the protection of the external borders of the Kingdom of Albania, and Albania in fact became a protectorate of Italy. After the Anschluss in Austria and after the Germans invaded the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia back then, there was the bilateral Steel Pact, and this imbalance was compensated by an intervention in Albania. In this 5-day military intervention of Italy from the 7th to the 12th of April 1939, the annexation follows on the 16th of April. In the context of the German Balkans campaign and the German occupation of Greece and Yugoslavia, the Kosovo and parts of Macedonia and Montenegro on the 12th of August 1941 became part of Albania, dominated by Italy. And thus, for the first time, a united Albanian state was created, and Greater Albania is a willful product of Italy and Germany. So when the Kosovo was occupied, the Italian and German troops were seen as liberators and not as occupying forces. The Italian military administration gave the Kosovo Albanians a lot of autonomy. Albanian schools and public officials, etc. In order to expand this backing by the Albanian population, the Italian occupying forces, out of political interests, always focused on the national identity and an ethnically pure Greater Albania. And the implementation of Greater Albania after the Tito partisans won the conflict, this wasn't continued and pursued further. So Enver Hoxha said in his records that even Tito said that the Albanian settlements belonged to Albania. But for domestic political reasons, it wasn't possible to implement this due to the Serb resistance that was expected. Instead, a preliminary solution was adopted, and the Kosovo in September 45 became an autonomous region within the Serb Republic. In order to create an equilibrium and to prevent a Serb overweight in the Yugoslav Federation, a final agreement was to be reached during the establishment of the socialist systems in Albania and Yugoslavia in the Balkan Federation. Until then, a rapprochement was to be achieved by opening borders and a customs union between Yugoslavia and Albania in order not to offer any breeding ground for nationalism. In 1948, a unification of both countries was imminent. The question of the Kosovo as an association of all Albanians would have been solved. The Balkans, ruled by Tito, from Stalin's point of view, would have been a competition, so he clandestinely instrumentalized Enver Hoxha from Albania in order to free himself from Tito and to follow Stalin. So Tito's and Stalin's fight over Albania led to a break in relations, and Belgrade was then thrown out from the Cominfor, and then the communists were purged in Yugoslavia. And that meant all of a sudden that all the efforts of including Albania and merging all Albanians under Belgrade's leadership were buried. After the death of Tito in 1980, the societal dissatisfaction in the Kosovo culminated with an uprising which turned against the bad conditions and the lack of perspective of most students after they finished their studies. After a couple of weeks, however, there were political demands that were put forward. There were some first calls for unification with Kosovo and Albania, and the demonstrators, the protesters, got also a lot of support from the population in the cities, in the countryside, but also in Macedonia. The demonstrations and protests were criticized as counter-revolutionary by the Yugoslav government because they wanted to merge with the Stalinist Albania.
Desintegrationsprozesse der jugoslawischen Föderation und der sich vermehrt zuspitzt.
And the tensions in Kosovo, renowned cultural historian Recep Kosa talked about the independence of Kosovo within the Yugoslav Federation, but for the first time he also said that all Albanian settlement areas in Serbia, Montenegro, Greece and Macedonia should merge to form a singular state and to become dissolved from Yugoslavia as a state, doing away with the historic justice meted out to the Albanian people in 1912 and 13. That formed the basis of his line of reasoning. Albanians and Kosovo Albanians saw independent developments within two independent political systems. Albanians, after the end of the Hoxha dictatorship, were exposed to abject poverty. Now, their countrymen, quote unquote, attempted to oppose the Serbian government. Grand Albanian mottos, therefore, did not really strike a responsive chord in the kin state Albania. All right, let's now turn to 1999, Grand Albanian aspirations after the Kosovo conflict. The then Prime Minister, Fatos Nano, in the course of 1999, set up a platform to promote cooperation between political leaders of Albania, Macedonia, and Kosovo. The aim was to set up a coherent overall strategy of integrating all Albanians. He emphasized the following: by creating this platform, no realization of Grand Albanian objectives was to be achieved, but a platform for all Albanians under the auspices of the European Union. Now, picking up the Albania question by Albania, well, that was something that the then equilibrium of forces did not promote in order to prevent ethnic conflicts from erupting. Albania was being quite pragmatic. Unification would mean that southern Albanians would be overrun by northern Albanians, including Kosovo Albanians, and that they would be politically marginalized. The political center of a unified state from Tirana would shift from Tirana to Pristina. According to a study carried out in 2004, an independence of Kosovo, well, that notion was more prevalent in the north than in the south. On the 17th of February 2008, the Kosovar parliament declared Kosovo's independence unilaterally, even though Resolution 1244 explicitly emphasized territorial integrity of Yugoslavia, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, but only in the preamble and not in the operative part of the resolution. So, independence gave rise to fears of a Grand Albania. The Constitution of Kosovo explicitly prohibited the unification of Kosovo with another country. In Article 1.3, it says, "The Republic of Kosovo shall have no territorial claims against and shall seek no union with any state or part of any state." End of quote. In Albania, there were reservations vis-à-vis Kosovo Albanians that are considered arrogant and not up to par. And then, of course, a competition between the elites of Pristina and Tirana. Now, as far as I know, no one has come up with a map showing how the union would evolve and where the political center of this union should actually be. Now, let's talk about the conflict between Serbia and Kosovo. In the summer of 2018, an independent turnabout took place. The Serb President Aleksandar Vučić and the Kosovo President Hashim Thaçi addressed this issue at the International Forum Alpbach, something that they had talked about secretly, a deal, a plan involving a territorial swap that could trigger many things, a recognition of Kosovo by Serbia, as well as an ethno-territorial struggle in the Western Balkans. Now, Belgrade's control of Republika Srpska, Srpska Lista in northern Kosovo ever since 2014. Well, this is like long-term strategic thinking. Thaçi's interest may lie differently. Now, a successful deal may give him carte blanche as far as criminal proceedings go, the criminal proceedings involving wars of crime. But many people warn against a redrawing of borders because this would actually open up Pandora's box, would trigger conflicts and demographic shifts in the Western Balkans. North Kosovo, where a lot of Serbs live, well, according to this plan, this was to go to Serbia, and the Preševo Valley in South Serbia would then go to Kosovo, according to the plan. Now, multilateral diplomacy was not something that John Bolton supported, and he said, well, our position is as follows. A redrawing of borders cannot be precluded, provided both sides are willing to strike a compromise. Federica Mogherini, as well as EU Commissioner Johannes Hahn, in charge of neighborhood relations and enlargement, well, they supported this deal. The Kosovar Prime Minister Ramos Haradinaj and a majority of parliamentarians, as well as the population, they were strictly opposed to any such plans revolving around the division. And they said that the president was not in a position to make a decision for Kosovo. And what about Albania's position? Let's talk about the media and social media. Well, there were no fierce debates. The debates have not been as fierce as in Kosovo. Amy Rama, on the other hand, said that he actually preferred a swap. There's evidence saying that for him this was just an interim step towards a strategic goal that led to a union of all Albanians. In Belgrade, Grand Albania, of course, this notion makes people quite concerned. For some years now, Ramas has come across as leader of all Albanians. He has dismissed a long-term foreign minister in December 2018. He rejected the swap and said so quite openly. Rama then called on a 26-year Kosovo Albanian. He appointed him interim foreign minister. And the developments then followed. Okay, let me now come to an end. Let me now come to the notion of thermodynamics. Heat can be transferred according to thermodynamics. So let us use some political energy to create political order. And with this, I'd like to thank you. The interpreter likes to point out that we have not received, unfortunately, the presentation, the speech that was read by the speaker. Thank you.
Lieber Wolf, danke für deine...
Thank you, Wolf, for this presentation. You talk about entropy and thermodynamics. That makes us think back high school days. I'm sure that there are some questions to the speaker, Ulrich Kaiser. Now, you analyzed the situation quite well. You talked about history as well as current developments, but of course there is a third player, which is Macedonia. Now, you mentioned you didn't mention the high number of Albanians in Macedonia. What about the situation there? And how does Albania relate to Macedonian Albanians? Well, it's between 25 and 30%. Actually, Albanians say that it's even more than 30% of Albanians living in Macedonia. Up until early last year, they suffered a lot. But there's a new leadership now in Macedonia. The new political leaders did something quite interesting. Well, they have an NGO background. And for the first time in contemporary history, the contemporary history of Europe, an NGO turned into a government, if you like, or NGO representatives became government representatives or ministers. Well, maybe in Armenia, something similar happened. So, Macedonia actually happened a bit earlier. Anyway, now Albanians in Macedonia, what they claim and what they demand is greater participation. They want to take part in power. Now, this is being discussed right now. There are long-winded discussions going on. But of course, the old elites still cling to the power in Macedonia. And it's quite difficult to strike the right balance. But of course, tensions have eased somewhat. What Albania tries to do is this. Albania tries to establish solid ties with Macedonia. Albania, as far as foreign policy goes, well, it tries to focus on what the then Turkish foreign minister referred to as nullo problemo. Well, of course, there are problems, though. There are problems involving Greece. There's, of course, a question of compensations, Albanians that had to flee Greece. Then, of course, maritime borders, that issue has not been solved. But the government has also reached out to Serbia as well as Macedonia and other countries. So I don't think that tensions will pick up considerably there. But there is, of course, another issue that I think should be elucidated. And if Wolfgang allows me to do this, I might actually write an article on this issue. Now, what this reminds me of, this back and forth, this to and fro, what this reminds me of is the following. So, Grand Albania. When is this concept mentioned? Well, it's whenever Albanians feel that in Brussels nothing is working involving us, or that Albania is being disregarded as far as enlargement is concerned. But maybe there are also tactical or strategic reasons behind this, depending on what vantage point you have. So the Grand Albanian concept comes up whenever pressure should be put on Brussels, because that's when Brussels diplomats may say, well, things may actually happen there, so we actually have to approach Albania, or else it might be some kind of impetus. But as I've said before, this is more pronounced in Kosovo than in Albania. Albanians are saying, we are a state anyway, and the Kosovo Albanians are saying, well, as a state, we cannot actually survive on a long-term basis without any foreign aid, and the unification process is the only thing that would actually support us. Now, you mentioned the Balkans in your presentation, and ever since the early 20th century, the Balkans has been a laboratory, if you like, a case in point, if you want to be cynical, a laboratory for the interplay and conflicts involving identities at various levels. In the Balkans, you see this pretty well. In the Balkans, you see the explosive power of nationalist ideas. My question is the following. There are also identities existing at other levels. To put it very simply, you've got regional identities, you've got community-based identities, and you've got transnational identities. Transnational identities also involve, of course, the EU. Now, can we be hopeful? Do you think that nationalist ambitions can be alleviated by this reference to higher identity levels, to higher levels of identity? Well, historically speaking, I'm a pessimist. I don't really believe in the future of the EU, considering the state of affairs. Just think about what Albanians may feel. Ever since 2014, they've been promised things. They've been told, yes, accession talks will commence. Every year, it said, well, you're not ready yet, you're not ready yet, you're not ready yet. Rightly so. But on the other hand, we need to point out the following. Accession talks, or the commencement of accession talks, well, that allows you to influence politics. Whether it's Edi Rama or Mr. Basha, the opposition leader, well, all of them can say, all of these political leaders can say, well, once we attain power, things will become better. That's not true. Accession talks will make it possible for you to impact on chapters 24, 25, judicial reforms. Well, unfortunately, EU diplomats have not really understood this up until now. They're saying, well, first you need to be ready, and then we can start negotiating. Now, I'm saying the opposite. That won't be possible for them. They can learn through this accession process. It's a learning curve for them. That allows them to progress. Now, overall, I don't think the EU will be able to achieve this. I don't think the EU offers many perspectives to Albanians because there is a brain drain. Hundreds of thousands have left the country, and hundreds of thousands will leave the country in the future. A young Albanian, or young Albanians, what they're saying is this, well, why should I wait for 15 or 20 years until the EU comes to my doorstep? I want to go to the EU and live there and work there. So at one point in time, maybe in 20 years, well, let's consider the EU still exists in 20 years' time in its present shape. Well, there might actually not be that many Albanians left. And how will this unpopulated Albania then become part of the EU? And that, of course, gives rise to problems affecting us as well, because what we're seeing is this brain drain. Meaning that a lot of Albanians leave their country, and then these intellectuals and these experts, well, there is a lack of them in the country. So in a unified Europe, Silesia and Eastern Prussia, well, they would all form Poland, and Poland is a member of the EU. But that's a perspective that Albanians don't have. They're saying, well, that's far away. The EU is really far away for us. And I don't think that we'll achieve membership status in our lifetimes. Well, thank you very much, Wolf, for this high-quality presentation, and I would like to thank you for your questions that you've put to the speaker. Thank you. Well, I know from experience that people start leaving us at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock on a Friday, and some people actually skip lunch. And they're hungry when they leave the conference, and that's why we have opted for a brunch that allows you to recharge your batteries, and then the conference will start again with the cyber panel. Bon appetit, and we'll resume after the brunch. Thank you.